Just when you think Joanne Catalina Rowling couldn't sink any lower than when she affirmed trans people as a quote, civilization-ending concept, she pushes her fans to take photographs of women in public bathrooms without their consent before publishing said photographs to the internet on the possibility that they might be transgender and should therefore be made to suffer for it. Just openly encouraging her fanbase to engage in what is, in the opinion of this legal layperson, a goddamn sex offense. Tell me that's not what she's saying here, because this is so ghastly that even a part of me doesn't want to acknowledge it. But I have to, because someone has to advocate for women and victims of sexual violence and point out the exact nature of what Rowling is doing, and that's what we do here at Essence of Thought. But first, a quick content warning for the following: transphobia, sexual violence, suicide, misogyny, racism, and fascism. If the work has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so that we can keep the channel running. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. I'd also just like to take this time to remind our viewers that the statements made throughout our videos are the opinions of myself, the host, based on the evidence I have available to me. They are not and should not be taken as unquestionable fact, which is why we reference everything, because we're fallible. Thus we strive to give you, the viewer, the ability to check all evidence yourself in order to make up your own mind, which is what the reference numbers in the top left corner are for, being numbers that match up with the reference list found in the transcript linked down below. As such, we encourage all viewers to do their own research to reach an informed conclusion about the topic. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and we need to talk about Joanne Catalina Rowling encouraging her fanbase to take photographs of unsuspecting women in public toilets before then posting those photographs online. As noted at the start, we recently covered the fact that Rowling openly declared a fellow gender-critical fascist a quote-unquote heroine for asserting that trans people are a civilization-ending concept, with Rowling going so far as to sign her applause with a kiss. That's just how enamored she was with said rhetoric. We also cover the fact that Rowling took shots at the asexual community for simply existing, with her erasing the facts that asexual people are 3 times more likely to be raped, and this is under the UK's highly restrictive definition of rape, than the women she pretends to care about are to be sexually assaulted in any manner, with Rowling labelling said extreme violence, quote-unquote, fake oppression. We also published a video on how Rowling has pledged the money made from Harry Potter and the wider Wizarding World franchise to groups who not only seek the total eradication of trans people from public life, but the terrorization of intersex people, Jewish people, women of colour, butch lesbians, and even survivors of breast cancer, pretty much anyone who doesn't adhere to their white patriarchal notions of femininity. Suffice to say, Rowling seeks to make everyone who isn't her and her inner circle suffer. Which brings us to the following exchange. In response to someone asking the simple question, "How are you planning to police public toilets?" Rowling replied with, quote, "Quite easily, really. Decent men will stay out, as they always have, so we can assume all who don't are a threat, given their disregard for women's and girls' safety, privacy, and dignity. Photographing, reporting, and disseminating such men's images online will be a piece of cake." End quote. Where do I even begin with this? Well, how about the fact that this is nothing new? If you've been around a while, you might recall the Hyde Park incident of 2017. To give you a quick summary, a gender-critical fascist and English Defence League supporter by the name of Mary McLachlan set about recording a group of trans people. A trans person by the name of Tara Wolfe attempted to slap the camera out of her hand before retreating, and McLachlan then used said slap as an excuse to ram into a group of trans people who naturally pushed her back. McLachlan's fellow fascists quickly piled in, a scuffle broke out before the two groups separated. During the chaos, however, McLachlan grabbed a random trans person in a headlock, dragged them across the park, and began violently shaking them. Again, this is not the person who slapped her camera, just a completely random stranger who defended their immediate space. As she was violently shaking this random person, McLachlan drops her camera onto the ground, smashing it, yet continues to shake said person. The trans group realized they're missing someone, saw what McLachlan was doing, and rushed over to free their friend, during which McLachlan was pushed to the ground. Now, the people who freed their friend were acquitted, and McLachlan was denied any compensation for her camera, with a judge openly acknowledging her disproportionate response as the primary reason it was destroyed. That just because someone slaps your camera doesn't mean you can then assault an entirely different group of people. However, Ms. Wolfe was charged and subsequently fined £150 by the state. Yet, when explaining her reasons for the action, Ms. Wolfe acknowledged that, quote, "Gender-critical fascists have a history of taking people's pictures and posting them in pages like genderidentitywatch.com, a database that makes us a target for the far right. It made me feel threatened because I have heard what gender-critical fascists have done in the past. They take people's pictures, they put them on the internet, and they dox, publish personal details about them. They've even been known to put people on paedophile watch websites." End quote. Sound familiar? The conflation of being trans with being a predator, particularly a child predator, is an old one, having been perfected by violent bigots targeting gay and bisexual people. This sort of behaviour is carried out with the intent of inflicting terror upon the victim, taking away what little sense of security they have, because they could lose their job, their home, or even become the target of a violent hate crime. That is what trans people were already dealing with in 2017, and we see that in what Rowling is pushing her fans to do in her post. So why haven't we heard more about this since then, at least relatively speaking? Well, because the UK gender-critical movement took things too far, at least in the eye of the public. That very same year, gender-critical icon, then 43-year-old Venice Allen, better known as her online persona Dr. Radfem, no actual degree, began stalking a 19-year-old woman, Lily Madigan. Allen spent months abusing Lily online, even trying to bait her into taking her own life at one point, purely because she was a trans woman and an elected Labour Party women's officer. Things came to a head, however, when Allen attended a Labour Christmas party and began taking selfies, making sure to get Lily in the background before posting them online, encouraging her fellow fascists to seek out and abuse Lily. This is gender-critical fascists telling a 19-year-old woman, barely an adult, that they have access to her and can assault her at any minute. It's like when an anti-abortion zealot sends a doctor a photo of their own house, informing them that they know where they live. Said threatening behaviour was too much for Labour to ignore, although it never should have reached that point in the first place, with them not only removing Allen from the Christmas party, but banning her from the political party entirely. This seemed to be the turning point in how the gender-critical movement operated at the time, leading them to focus more on dominating the papers with claims of genuine concerns, rather than directly terrorizing trans people. As such, Allen seems to have fallen out of favour in the community, especially in light of further evidence exposing her as a predator. In one case that re-emerged in discussions surrounding Lily, Allen physically assaulted and then sexually harassed a trans person of colour mere hours after the previously discussed Hyde Park incident, because yes, she was one of the gender-critical fascists involved in that as well. She hasn't gone completely, and there are those who continued to use said methods, but it became much less prevalent overall, especially around the time Rowling became involved and started projecting this idea that gender-critical fascists were merely a civil group of women with concerns who had been unfairly demonized. One prominent member of the gender-critical movement who continued to use these sorts of methods is Graham Linehan. In 2021, Linehan forced his way onto a lesbian dating app, began taking photos of users he deemed not feminine enough before publishing them online in a sad attempt to prove how dangerous trans lesbians were. All he actually managed to prove was how dangerous he was to women, particularly queer women. Then, in 2023, Linehan stole photos of trans people's top surgery and published them online, without their consent, again, trying to incite violence against trans people. As for the third case in 2024, I can't really go into detail on this topic, not until the conclusion of the trial surrounding an incident between Linehan and a then 17-year-old girl that's set to start in September. All I will say is that, outside of the main incident, Linehan took to posting photos of said 17-year-old girl for months, openly asking for her name, address, and place of study. So, in general, Linehan has been trying to revive this tactic, which really isn't all that surprising considering what a sad man Linehan is, having willingly destroyed his career, his friendships, and even his marriage in a desperate bid to hurt trans people. Which is why it's so terrifying to see Joanne Kathleen Rowling, the de facto leader of the gender-critical movement, encourage her fans to engage in similar behaviour. This is an escalation, an attempt to mainstream what had previously been relegated to the fringe, used by someone Rowling had openly ignored, much to Linehan's dismay. This is Rowling fully committing to taking off the mask, something she's been doing a lot recently. This is her swan diving over the mole event horizon. It is clear incitement to engage in sexual harassment, at least in line with how sexual harassment is defined under the 2010 Equality Act, namely, quote, unwanted conduct of a sexual nature that has the purpose or effect of either violating the other person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for them. End quote. Do note, public bathrooms are one of the spaces covered by the Equality Act. In light of said fact, how is taking photos of random women using public bathrooms in order to challenge their gender not an act or sexual nature that has the effect of violating the other person's dignity, creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, and offensive environment? So not even one of those things, which is all that's needed, but all of them. Contrary to their assertions, gender-critical fascists such as Rowling cannot always tell. Not only do many trans women pass, but many cis women fail to adhere to the white patriarchal standards of femininity gender-critical fascism upholds. We saw this in how gender-critical fascists, encouraged by the UK Supreme Court ruling earlier this year, increased their harassment of butch lesbians, women of colour, and even survivors of breast cancer in an effort to exclude trans women from public life. Not even members of the gender-critical movement are spared such transvestigation. In 2023, a marathon runner with alopecia was accused of being trans and attacked as a, quote, sick, ugly man, end quote. Then, in 2024, she was harassed inside an airport bathroom, again, because the person harassing her thought she was a trans woman, leading her to share her story and receive an outpouring of support from the trans community, myself included. That's when she came out in support of the very narratives that led her to be targeted. That is how desperate these people are to hurt trans people that they'd harm themselves to do so. That is just how sick and twisted they've chosen to be. Hell, even Rowling herself doesn't meet her own standards of femininity, at least not originally. And while she can spend hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions on gender-affirming surgeries and expensive lawyers to restrict the number of old photos of her that can be found online, most cis women cannot. Just taking a look at her in this 1999 interview with 60 Minutes, it's difficult for me, as a trans person who has been forced to look into transvestigators and their common tells, to not see the dozen or so things on her face that they would point to as proof that she's really a man, even though she's a cis woman. That's not intended as a spiteful gotcha. I take no joy in the fact that had Rowling not had the surgeries she has, she'd likely be one of the women being targeted right now. I bring this up to note the fact that she's keenly aware of her own hypocrisy. She knows just how unfair the standards all women are forced to adhere to are. Yet she still hates trans people. And that hatred overrides any sense of empathy or compassion she has for cis women like herself, who don't meet the white patriarchal standards of femininity she now glorifies. She knows all this. She just doesn't care. She'd happily throw every other cis woman to the wolves, so long as it made a single trans person suffer. That is her legacy now, encouraging her fans to sexually harass anybody who looks the way she once did. Just to hurt us. And that's just focusing on the photographing aspect. That's not even getting to the part about posting said photos online, seemingly to encourage some sort of anti-trans mob, like we discussed earlier. Behaviour which, I must add, appears to me to be a case of incitement to violence against a person or persons belonging to or believed to belong to a protected characteristic, i.e. a member of the trans community, making this an example of hate speech. Because what's the purpose of uploading those photos? It's to present any woman who doesn't match the predator's white patriarchal standards of femininity, whether they're trans or cis, endosex or intersex, as an existential threat to real women, i.e. those that do align with said arbitrary standards. This is a common tactic on the far right that has historically been used as a way to whip up extreme violence against marginalized people. This is Rowling laying the groundworks for digital lynchings. Which, to be clear, would still be a crime against basic humanity, even if it only harmed trans women. But it doesn't. It harms all women, including cis women, particularly women of colour, butch lesbians, and survivors of cancer. So, even if you're a cis person who doesn't know a trans person and thus thinks you and your loved ones are safe, you're not. If you're a woman, you could very easily be turned into the target of a digital mob, and if you're a man, it could harm any of the women in your life. And it won't end with said photos being uploaded to the internet. There will be teams of gender-critical fascists hunting down said people's names, addresses, and places of work before using that information to try and destroy their life, leaving threatening letters pinned to their doors, filing a false report of them being a sexual predator in order to try and get them fired, even physically assaulted. You name it, they'll try it. This is what Joanne Kathleen Rowling is attempting to unleash on the world. And for as much as I wish we could ignore her as a hack children's author, she has the money and the political capital to do serious harm. She has the leader of the Tory party, Kemi Badenoch, firmly in her pocket, whilst the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, attempts to do whatever he can to prove to Rowling that he can be just as cruel to trans people. This is the seriously messed up world Rowling has created. Though, to be fair, this is only the second most fucked up world Rowling has created, with Harry Potter being a world in which the titular protagonist is a literal slave owner in books intended for children. The difference is, this is real. This is hurting, living, breathing people, and we need the rest of society to take action. Stop giving this billionaire money, stay up to date on her actions, and protest in support of policies to burn billionaires out of politics. Though, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the post? What impact is this escalation likely to have, and how do we best counter it? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help keep us running, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Super Thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Flynn, Bo Ayer, Deborah Goldsmith, Higgins the Seagull, Jackie Sins, Mix Alba, and Peter Cole. And for myself, Edita, and Levi, take care now.